At the end of every game you come face to face with the final boss, the last test of your skill you have to overcome before the credits roll and you can really say you have beaten the game. Of course, the concept of a final boss has become a little less solid over the last couple of years with post-game content, but for this list I'll use the last boss you fight before the credits roll in any given game. If you get a credits roll after some post-game boss fights, it'll count too. If you get a credits roll halfway through the game just because, it'll count too. Now that that's clear, let's start with my top 5 final bosses. And oh yeah, of course there will be spoilers since I'll be talking about the endings of these games. Dr. Fetus, Super Meat Boy. I tend to complain a lot about final bosses in games, saying that they should be a test of the skills you've built up while playing the game and not some weird gimmick or mechanic specific to this boss. This of course holds true for any boss fight, but in a final boss this is more important than ever. So taking a game like Rayman 2, while it is an amazing game, the final boss doesn't do its job properly. In contrast to that, we have Super Meat Boy. The final boss in this game is literally just a very difficult platforming level with an enemy trying to kill you. All the bosses in this game stick to the gameplay that you use in normal levels too, and they all work very well because of it. Granted, the boss isn't very interesting altogether, but just because of the basic game design, which is very well done here, I think it deserves a spot on this list. Then, when you've made it to the end and you think you've won, you have to make your way all the way back through the level. Yes, this level goes both ways. At first you're being chased by Dr. Fetus, and when you're finally rid of him and you think you got Bandage Girl, you have to run back with her to safety. I don't think I've got much more to add, it just shows you how I think a final boss should work. It just needs some more depth though, because right now it's literally just playing a level. Xemnas, Kingdom Hearts 2. This isn't really a boss fight, rather it's a sequence of a number of different bosses. Whether you just count the final fight against Xemnas or the whole sequence from the point of no return, it's by far the best ending to a Kingdom Hearts game as a whole. You start by sabotaging something that looks like some sort of engines of... I don't know what. But you need to break them by hitting special enemies into them, which you will usually only see in Gummy Ship missions. Then you go inside the thing where you have to break... another thing. I don't know what it is with the setup to this fight, but for some strange reason, Xemnas has a tower which might also be a plane because of the jet engine looking things. Anyway, after you break this too, you'll finally get to face Xemnas. In this fight he uses most of the organization's weapons against you, a nice callback to the fight you've already had before this and a good way to show just how powerful Xemnas is supposed to be. When you manage to defeat this form, which is rather easy, you think it's all over. Donald and Goofy go back to the Destiny Islands with Mickey and Kairi, but just before you and Riku can follow him, it turns out Xemnas is riding a literal dragon which you now have to fight in a Gummy Ship-like gameplay style. This isn't too difficult, but of course by now you know this isn't the end of the game. You have to fight Xemnas in the same form as before. This time he's got a couple of new tricks though, and generally is just a more difficult fight. This is my favorite part of the whole boss sequence without a doubt. Sora and Riku are flying around, hitting buildings with the dragon which has settled itself in the city below the world that never was. In short, who cares about gravity? Finally we can now fight Xemnas in his final form. He suddenly changed his robes now to match the fighting arena and be more dramatic I suppose. And he flies all over the place, shooting lasers at you, hitting you constantly, and he even goes as far as to capture Sora. This allows you to play as Riku for a short while and break Xemnas' grip on Sora before he runs out of HP and you die. Then when you finally get him down to a low enough amount of HP, a scripted event takes place where you have to mash buttons to protect both Sora and Riku from an insane amount of lasers. After which it's just a matter of landing the last hit on Xemnas and then watching the ending cutscene and the credits roll. Professor Kukui, Pokemon Sun and Moon. Not what you expected I guess. Every list ever plays Red from Pokemon Gold and Silver here, and while I do agree that's a worthy contender for this spot, better than its Hard Gold and Soul Silver counterparts anyway, I think Professor Kukui deserves this spot just a little bit more. You see, in Pokemon Sun and Moon, as well as Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, there's no Pokemon League yet in the region. Just as you go through your island trials, the professor is setting up everything just in time for you to challenge the Elite Four, which consists of the island Kahunas. But when you make your way to the champion fight, you have no idea what you're about to face. In the first generation it was your rival, a really nice twist at the end of the game. In the second game it was Lan, someone who you knew from the first game and who you got to meet during the main adventure. Then in the third game it was Steven, again, somebody you got to meet during your adventure. This trend keeps all the way up until Generation 7, where you never get to meet any champion because there simply wasn't any. So No champion battle? Actually, seeing as how you're the first champion, the battle you face after the Elite Four is not one to win the champion title, rather, it's to defend your newly gained title. I don't know about you guys, but as a kid I always wanted to be the champion or a gym leader, just waiting for challenges I could beat down. These games allow you to do that more or less. After you beat the Elite Four, the professor comes up to challenge you. This works as both a way to give the player the satisfaction of being a champion, but also the curiosity we all feel to a professor's team. Didn't we all want to fight Professor Oak when we were younger? For some reason in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon this was replaced by a rival, which isn't very well done if you ask me, but still holding that feeling of defending your title. This feeling is even stronger when you go back through the Elite Four a couple of times and find that every time you finish there will be a new challenger for you to take on to defend your title against. Kukui is one of the options you can end up facing, but it's not quite the same. Braska's final Aeon, Final Fantasy X. Mechanically probably the least interesting boss in this fight. Which is a shame, since this game delivers some bosses which require more than just hit them really hard and often. Sadly, that's exactly what this boss is. Just hit him over and over again with your strongest attack and make sure you don't die. Keep some status healing spells or items ready and this shouldn't be that big of a problem. I hear you wonder why I even put it on this list if I think about this fight in such a negative way. As you may have noticed on this list so far, a final boss fight is more than just a boss fight by itself. It ties up all the loose ends of the game. It's a thing you've been working towards all this time. That's exactly why I hate boss fights that come out of nowhere. Take Final Fantasy IV as an example. For the majority of the game you're chasing gold bars, but then at the very end of the game it turns out there's even a bigger, better guy and that's the final boss. While this raises the stakes somewhat since you'll now have to fight someone that's much more powerful than what you were originally anticipating, it also destroys any emotional connection you had to the antagonist, and the final boss just becomes another enemy, just one that deals more damage and takes a couple of more hits. Now, going back to Final Fantasy X. Right from the start of the game you know Sin is your target. He's the reason you're in this position. He's the reason of everyone's misery and sorrow. But then, just as you think the game is about to end, you find out that Sin isn't an entity on its own. It's just a shell which is reborn over and over again, and the main character's father is a current version of Sin. This keeps the plot twist element but also keeps a narrative and emotional connection. In fact, it enhances it since you've been looking for your father since the very start of the game, and now you know where he is. So you go to fight Sin, but instead of this being the final fight, it's little more than unlocking entry to the last part of the game. A world filled with strong enemies that level you up so fast you won't even know what to do with all of these levels. Then, when it's time to face the final fight, you don't see a monster, not some gross weird thing that mindlessly tries to kill you. Instead, you see your father, the man who you can't help but love, even though the hatred you feel for him. It's time to start the fight and he transforms into Braska's final Aeon, the true form of Sin, and now it's time to kill your father. Kill Sin. I don't think I've ever seen a final boss which works as well in a narrative before or since this game. So, while it may not be very interesting in a gameplay sense, it more than makes up for it with its addition to the story. Flowey, Undertale. So far we've talked about story-based bosses, plot twists and gameplay-based bosses. So why not throw them all together into a single boss fight to dominate the top of this list? Of course you see Flowey in the beginning of the game where you think he's giving you a tutorial. Just in time for Toriel to save you from what seemed to be a friendly little flower, but actually is one of the most brutal monsters around. Of course you'll learn all about fighting, but also about sparing enemies. They just attack you because they're scared, not because they're evil. You go through the world of the underground and end up facing Asgore. When you finally manage to beat him, you think the game is over. But it's not. The same little flower you faced at the start of the game now attacks you and ends up being the single most badass boss fight in this game. And difficult too. He even cheats, making save states and using any trick he can to keep you from winning. I don't think anyone would expect this while just playing through the game, but that's just the start. After you beat Flowey in the true pacifist run, you find out this isn't really the end of the game. Instead you find out Flowey's actually the Prince of the Underground. Long story short, this is one powerful dude. A god in fact, who wants to destroy everything. Oh yeah, of course there's more. This fight gets really meta when Asriel decides destroying the world isn't good enough. Instead he wants to reset the timeline so everyone can be happy again. This of course means he just wants to start a new game. The fight against him is both epic, difficult and emotional all at once. Undertale being an RPG where you don't have to fight was part of its popularity. The way it built characters was the other part of it, and Asriel is the ultimate example of that. Within the last hour of the game, it throws you 2 really strange plot twists, and both end up making a lot of sense and improving the game. You can't simply do that unless you're a true genius at writing. Of course, there's only one true final boss, and that's the subscribe button, so hit it quickly and defeat it. Don't forget to pay attention to his minion, the thumbs up button too, and leave your strategies for beating him in the comments below. Until the next time, bye.